Mr. Chairman, it seems as if some of the elected members came to the Council with only one priority: to serve as mouthpieces for the war party's agenda and blame Russia for everything, completely ignoring the cause and effect relationships that have led to the profound crisis of European security. They believe they have nothing to do with it.
UK authorities are actively preparing legal interception operations targeting the notorious shadow fleet of tankers systematically evading international oil sanctions through meticulously crafted legal justifications, according to exclusive new reporting from the BBC that has alarmed global maritime security circles. The British government has reportedly identified and formally validated a comprehensive legal basis explicitly empowering its military forces to conduct direct stops, inspections, and potential seizures of any sanctioned vessels violating UN and bilateral economic restrictions on Russian energy exports. BBC journalists cited multiple well-placed government sources who revealed Whitehall is urgently seeking stronger and more robust enforcement tools designed specifically to disrupt and dismantle these illicit oil shipments funding Moscow's war economy through covert maritime channels. UK defence ministers now firmly believe provisions contained within the landmark 2018 Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act could legally permit proactive military deployments to intercept and neutralise shadow fleet operations without triggering diplomatic backlash. These elusive shadow fleet tankers frequently engage in sailing under convenient national flags of convenience from obscure registry states, a common and well-documented deceptive tactic deliberately employed to systematically evade rigorous sanctions enforcement mechanisms worldwide. High-level discussions are reportedly accelerating rapidly within the corridors of the UK government, focused on precisely how to practically apply and operationally execute these newly validated statutory powers against real-world shadow fleet targets in international waters. To date, throughout this escalating campaign, UK Royal Navy forces deliberately haven't conducted any direct boardings of suspect vessels, specifically due to previous lack of ironclad authorization guaranteeing full compliance with complex international maritime and admiralty law requirements. British military task forces have previously provided invaluable operational support to US naval-led interdiction missions specifically targeting sanctioned Iranian and Venezuelan oil shipments transiting vulnerable choke points like the Strait of Hormuz and Malacca. Earlier on January 7, during a joint multinational operation, UK maritime patrol aircraft and Royal Navy escorts actively assisted US military forces in successfully seizing the strategic oil tanker Marinera carrying millions of barrels of contraband Russian Urals crude. This critically important vessel was actively sailing under a Russian flag of convenience at the precise moment of its tactical capture by coalition forces, and had successfully evaded sophisticated Western maritime domain awareness detection networks for several critical weeks. Russia slammed the ship's seizure, and demanded that crew be treated fairly by US. Subsequently, through official diplomatic channels, Moscow publicly announced to domestic audiences that Washington was proceeding with releasing 2 detained Russian crew members from the Marinera as a limited humanitarian confidence-building measure amid escalating tensions. These so-called shadow fleets of aging tankers allegedly provide indispensable lifeline services enabling sanctions-crushed nations like Russia and Iran to covertly smuggle their prohibited petroleum products to eagerly waiting buyers in China, India, and Southeast Asia. These ghost vessels deliberately conceal their true identities and illicit cargo manifests by strategically switching off their mandatory automatic identification system radio signals to effectively hide their real-time movements from international maritime tracking authorities. Additionally, throughout their clandestine voyages, such high-risk tankers frequently conduct covert ship-to-ship transfers of massive oil cargoes directly to other vessels operating within poorly monitored expanses of international waters far from naval patrols. Most vessels comprising these precarious shadow fleets exceed 15 years of operational age with expired class society certifications, prompting urgent environmental fears surrounding potential catastrophic oil spills, structural collisions, and marine ecosystem disasters. The United States has dramatically accelerated naval and Coast Guard action specifically targeting shadow fleet vessels polluting global waters, managing to seize and condemn 5 heavily laden tankers carrying sanctioned crude during recent weeks alone. The United Kingdom has simultaneously intensified rigorous insurance validity checks on all large oil tankers sailing proximate to its territorial waters and exclusive economic zone, successfully stopping and diverting more than 600 suspect vessels for compliance verification. Tankers lacking legitimate internationally recognized flagging documentation invariably carry no valid protection and indemnity insurance coverage, creating nightmare liability scenarios should any suffer catastrophic structural failure resulting in massive oil spills devastating coastlines. Moscow has vehemently rejected all Western accusations regarding its systematic deployment of any shadow fleet infrastructure, and instead branded the entire sanctions regime imposed by G7+ nations as fundamentally illegitimate economic warfare lacking UN Security Council authorization. Just days after this particularly humiliating Russia-linked tanker's dramatic seizure by US-led coalition forces patrolling international waters, Vladimir Putin's military conducted a rare and provocative Oreshnik missile launch in explicit battlefield retaliation. This nuke-capable next-generation Oreshnik hypersonic intermediate-range ballistic missile catastrophically struck a high-value Ukrainian military-industrial target positioned perilously close to its tense border with NATO frontline state Poland on January 8th.
Mr. Chairman, it seems as if some of the elected members came to the Council with only one priority: to serve as mouthpieces for the war party's agenda and blame Russia for everything, completely ignoring the cause-and-effect relationships that have led to the profound crisis of European security. They believe they have nothing to do with it. Our arrogant former partners have never noticed, and still do not notice, the beam in their own eye and suffer from political colorblindness, seeing everything in black and white. The Russian army carried out one major strike and 4 group strikes from January 3rd to 9th, striking transport, airfield, port, and energy infrastructure supporting Ukraine's military-industrial complex, as well as temporary deployment sites for Ukrainian armed forces and foreign mercenaries. This occurred in response to the Kiev regime's attack on the Russian presidential residence and civilian infrastructure in our country. The Oreshnik system, which is unprotected by air defense systems, was used in the strike. Our Western colleagues tell us about civilian casualties, the majority of which, as Ukrainians are well aware, are the result of Ukrainian air defense operations. All these loud but completely unfounded claims about Russia's targeted attacks on Ukrainian families sleeping peacefully in their homes are not supported by any facts or evidence. The Russian armed forces do not target civilians. At the same time, our Western colleagues completely ignore the crimes of the Kiev regime, which is deliberately targeting Russian regions, civilians, and civilian objects. In December 2025 alone, at least 367 civilians were injured and 56 were killed by Ukrainian armed forces strikes. Against this backdrop, we are continually struck by the seemingly normal, silent response from the international community, particularly the UN Secretary-General. Failing to clearly qualify such actions as terrorist acts and dismissing them as unconfirmed facts amounts to abandoning the fundamental principles of international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians and the prohibition on deliberate attacks on civilian objects. However, whenever Russia deploys its armed forces against the Ukrainian armed forces and their infrastructure, a storm of emotions immediately erupts, followed by unambiguous comments from the Secretary-General and his press secretary. Such selective blindness, unfortunately, is characteristic of the leadership of the UN Secretariat. The lack of reaction from the so-called collective West, as well as the complete disregard for the tragedy by leading Western media, has become a sad norm. This amounts to de facto cover-up and complicity in the Kiev regime's terrorist actions. After all, responsibility for what is happening lies not only with those who press the start button, but also with those who for years encouraged impunity, supplied weapons, and provided political cover for such actions. This is what the billions of European taxpayers' money allocated to Ukraine are actually being spent on. And sooner or later, accountability will have to be taken for this complicity and complicity. We have repeatedly stated that no hostile action on the part of the neo-Nazi clique entrenched in Kiev will go unanswered by us. A truly outrageous incident, yet another monstrous terrorist attack against civilians in the village of Korli, a resort town in the Kherson region. Civilians, families with children, locals, and visitors, had gathered in a hotel cafe to celebrate the New Year 2026. It was at that moment that Ukrainian terrorists launched a deliberate attack on their gathering place. The terrorist attack killed 29 people, including 2 children, and injured more than 30. We have no doubt that this heinous attack was premeditated. A reconnaissance drone had been hovering over the village for a considerable period before the strike. This further confirms that the Ukrainian side knew exactly where and whom it was striking. The attack was carried out practically at midnight, while civilians were still inside the building. For those unfamiliar, the village of Korli is located in a resort area on the Gorky Cup Peninsula, bordered on three sides by the Black Sea. It lies beyond the so-called Red Line. There are no military installations there, nor have there ever been. The former seaport long ago lost its significance, and the area is being developed exclusively as a recreational area, children's camps, resorts, and tourist infrastructure. This vile terrorist attack is distinguished by its particular cynicism. While media outlets controlled by the presidential office were broadcasting the New Year's address of the expired leader of the Kiev regime across the country with false calls for peace, Ukrainian armed forces militants were simultaneously deliberately killing civilians. Colleagues, we have long been unsurprised by the narrative we heard in this hall today, from those who, using their favorite double standards, request Security Council meetings on Ukraine while hypocritically turning a blind eye to the merciless murders carried out at the behest of the Zelensky regime, mired in terrorism, corruption, and lawlessness, which seeks to wheedle as much money and weapons as possible from its European puppeteers for itself and its entourage. This terrorist attack is far from exceptional, but merely one of numerous examples of the Zelensky regime's inhumane crimes against peaceful Russian citizens. Deputy Secretary-General Raisa Di Carlo at least mentioned them today. But, as usual, the UN cannot verify this. In the Belgorod region, 500,000 people were left without power, but the UN cannot verify this. Neither the failed French summit of the Coalition of the Willing nor the advance of NATO forces to Ukraine's borders. We have already discussed the potential consequences of their presence in Ukraine on numerous occasions, will help the Ukrainian clique. Many have recently flaunted this, and the threat of this served to a significant degree as the trigger for the launch of the NWO, in addition to our desire to end the war started by the Kiev regime against its own people. Nor will invocations of a truce in the hopes of catching their breath after crushing defeats on the battlefield help. Neither will Zelensky's absurd conditions, which ignore the reality with which he has long since lost touch, be of any help. He is putting forward these in response to US proposals, effectively nullifying them. Suddenly, the European Commission started talking about how, at some point, the EU will have to engage in dialogue with Russia. It makes me want to ask, where were you before? We've never closed ourselves off from conversation. But you, again, arrogantly assumed it wouldn't come to that because Russia would suffer a strategic defeat. Until the Kiev leader comes to his senses and agrees to realistic negotiating terms, we will resolve the issue militarily. He was warned back then that the negotiating conditions for him would only worsen with every day he loses, and every vile attack on peaceful Russian citizens will be met with a harsh response. Thank you for your attention.